All right, so I'm here today with some coffee. I just have some Rocky Mountain Thunder from Boyers, and I took some whole milk and frothed it in my espresso machine, and so I have like frothed whole milk on top of some Boyers coffee. So I wanted to talk about saving the contrast today. And save the contrast might be a funny way of saying it, but what I'm trying to talk about is the extremes. And we've heard about these in different ways. Jesus said, "Let your yes be yes and your no no." Whenever someone tells me, "I'm telling you the truth and I'm not even lying," it puts makes everything else they've ever said to me a little suspect. So if you don't tell me that you're telling the truth and that you're not even lying, are you still telling the truth? Or are you only telling the truth and not even lying if you tell me that you're not even lying? Um, it's kind of a funny situation to get yourself in with your language if you get to that point where you're having to always designate whether you're telling the truth and not even lying. So today, for my coffee talk, I just had a few thoughts I wanted to share. When I was a boy, my mom would really work hard with us on certain words. A word would come sweeping through our peer group, our community, and all of the others would be using it. And, one of those words back in the 90s, that's at least when it hit us, was cool, where you'd say cool. That's really cool. That's awesome. That's cool. And this, these days I find myself using the word cool a lot. But in the 90s, my mom was really wanting us to be specific about what we're saying and not to use the word cool if that's not really what we mean. And she she had a lot of other words, and she didn't talk to us about cuss words and swear words as much as she talked about unnecessary words, words that didn't mean, well, the dictionary had one meaning for them, but then public slang would turn them into having another meaning. And so people would use them for everything. And I remember a couple years back, I was around more military folk for a little while. This has probably been a decade or more ago now that I'm thinking about it. And there was an interesting remark made about how the by calling something the mother of all whatever it is. So if it's if you have a rabbit, you say it's the mother of all rabbits. If you have a war, it's the mother of all wars. And so you like the way they were using that terminology. It meant the worst of the worst and everything else. But then you'd start using it, to where if you had a mosquito land on your head, or if you like me 2 weeks ago, if you have a fly showing up or something. And so you'd start using this lingo that at one point was designed to mean the worst of the worst, and it would become down to mean just something maybe less worse. And so I the I'm not quite sure how I'm going to communicate what I'm thinking in my head, so I'm just going to share several stories, okay? So, as a boy, when mom was really working with us, saying, "I don't want you to use all this language all the time. I'd rather have you be creative, use the full dictionary." And one summer, one of my friends would come over, and every day our job was to find one new word in the dictionary that we could use. And it's funny, after 1995 until now, what I remember from that time was I remember we discovered that the prefix preter could actually be used as a standalone word. So you could say that was preter 9/11, that was preter my marriage, that was preter my coffee talk. It just meant it was beforehand, and that was one of the words I remember. We found some other pretty phenomenal words, used some large words, and we would talk about them. And the whole point that my mom was trying to help us with was don't get stuck using one word and adding so many meanings. Now we all know that when you're in a group or on a team or something and you're working together, and certain words begin to have more nuanced meanings. And so you use them in particular ways, and you start thinking, and they mean something other than just what everyone else thinks they mean. And so I understand that. I understand that there's some nuances to our language that we can have, and that can be fun. But I'm digging at something deeper here. We are familiar with the old story of someone who cries, of the boy who cried wolf. And he cried wolf, and then everyone comes running because it's serious if there's a wolf, and there is no wolf, so he just laughs at them. And so then he tries it again another day, and everyone laughs, and and not everyone laughs. People come running, and then finally when he cries wolf, they send someone out to see, is it for real or is it not? And then when the wolf actually comes, he yells and yells and yells, and nobody comes because nobody believes him. And so I remember reading that in our reader when I was going to elementary, one-room schoolhouse with my Amish schoolhouse. I read that story, and I remember thinking about it, and the point that was trying to be made, that I'm now trying to make, is it's really important that we reserve our ability to make a statement. If every time I show up somewhere and I breathe heavy and I say, guys, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it. And I set myself up to say something, and everyone's like, what is he going to say? What is it? And then I say something like, I love lemon meringue, or I love coffee, or whatever I might say. The risk I run is that whenever I have something that's actually important to say, everyone's going to think it's going to be one of my jokes, and they're not even going to listen. So I want to reserve the ability to say something. So for instance, in my adult life, I don't use obscenities in the way the rest of most of the people I've ever been around will use obscenities in some way or another. And I don't. When I use the word hell, I want you to know what I mean. And so I don't want to use it in a way that will take away its meaning. I am referring to a very specific place referenced in the scripture, and I want that to be the meaning of that. And so when someone has gone through a very difficult time and have literally dealt with the demons of hell and have gone through a very difficult time, you might hear me use that word as a description of what they've done. But I don't want to use it on a daily basis. I don't want to use it year in, year out to where it loses all of its meaning. I want to be able to, in all my words of a vocabulary, I want to be able to go and choose this one, and it's bad, and I want to use it, and it makes an impression. There are some people that I have known who, if they swore up and down and used a lot of obscenities, it was just another day in the neighborhood. It's just what they always did. It didn't mean a thing. I didn't know whether he was happy or sad or mad or glad. I didn't know, because he always used the same obscenities and always the same swear words. But I want it to be where if you ever see me running down the street or down the hallway yelling obscenities, that you too will start running, and that you don't think of them as being obscene as in a kind of a laughable sense, but you'll think of it as being like really bad and really obscene, and it's horrible. Whatever Joseph is running from is really bad. So that's what I'm trying to reserve. And this is in large part due to my mother explaining this when I was in my teens, which she said, you have a wonderful ability to understand what different words mean. Don't get stuck on the words. And so she even had it for a while where each of us had, at the beginning of the week, she'd give each one of us 20 beans or something like that. And then she would have us, if we caught each other using words in just that kind of slang sense where we would, something's cool or whatever, she would say, don't say cool. Explain what you really mean. And so, for instance, if I heard one of my siblings say, that's cool, I would say bean, and it would pause everything for a moment, and this next stage would have to happen. I would have to look at what they said and what they were talking about, and then I'd have to give them a better vocabulary word to describe what they meant. So if they said that was really cool, I would have to look and say, Wow, that and depending what it was, because sometimes we're talking about something, a hot tub, and we call it cool, and it's not technically cool, it's actually hot. And so we have to use the word that we mean. This is really relaxing, this is so refreshing, this is so exhilarating. So if someone's on a swing, maybe if my sibling was on a swing and they were swinging and they said this is cool, I'd say no, what you mean is this is exhilarating, this is exciting. Whatever, we had to come up with another word. If we couldn't come up with the next word, at least this is my memory of it, my siblings might correct me on this because we use the bean system for several things. But if I caught you using an unnecessary word, I could bean you, but then I had to give you a better vocabulary word for it. And if I could just bean you and not give you a better vocabulary, then it was useless. The beans, I didn't get your bean. Otherwise, you had to give me a bean. And then at the end of the week, we'd count up all the beans, and these would count as little score points with purchasing power in Mom's store that she had. She had a box with a lot of treats and other things in it that we could purchase things from if we had enough points. And so you'd be trying to guard your points the whole week. So you didn't want to slip in your vocabulary. You wanted to always use the precise word that you mean. And so the fun part was, if you start running the faucet and the water is lukewarm, and then it gets to cool down, and then you say loudly, "This is really cool," and immediately from 3 places in the room someone says, "Bean," and then they look over and you're like, "No, I mean the water is really cool," and then I win because I used the word the way it was supposed to be used. So as you can see, I liked word games, and I liked trying to get my siblings in trouble, and I liked to not get in trouble, but to tease them myself. So that was the kind of background to my first thoughts on how to use words properly in their proper setting, and to use as large of a vocabulary as possible. Now, what's fun for me is to hear my little boys using sometimes very large words for a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, and so that's really fun, and it's rewarding. So I want us to be able to use the words and say what we mean, and not to just slip into using language that eventually loses its meaning because we've used it so much. For instance, one of the words that I've heard around politics and around other things a lot is a phrase where we say now more than ever before. And people say it intending for it to motivate you and to push you to the brink and to really move you. But I've been hearing it for 20 years. Every election, every issue, every campaign, every fundraiser, everything that comes along, they use this word, now more than ever before. And quite frankly, I'm calling bean, and I'm saying, if you care about the life of a human being, then you should you should help support this cause. If you're concerned about integrity in elections, then you should make this decision. I'm calling bean on this now more than ever before, and I expect you all, don't send me beans. I don't want that many beans, because a lot of people have been using it, and I don't I don't want. Speaking of people sending me stuff, I've actually been getting a lot of comments, messages, text messages, even a few phone calls. And then for Thanksgiving, I got a Thanksgiving card from my friend Wayne in Illinois, and I wasn't actually prepared for this. When I started doing Coffee Time with Pastor Joseph, I wasn't thinking that I would get a lot of response other than you guys making some comments live while we're going. I wasn't expecting mail. I wasn't expecting to actually see what was happening on, that people would actually send me things. And so it's been really interesting to actually get stuff. And so I've been reading it. I'm very grateful, but I wasn't prepared. So now I'm going to have to figure out how to be able to respond back to everyone who shares with me, and how to be able to maybe write letters and say thank you. I don't know. I wasn't expecting this. So I'm very grateful for the connection. Thank you for watching and listening and responding and interacting with me. I'm so grateful for that. But the now more than ever before phrase is not the only one that I want to use. For instance, right now, there are other words that we use all the time. And so the word, pandemic, right now, I think has been somewhat misused in, and here's how I want to say this, because I understand that COVID is an actual disease and an actual flu, and it actually is a strain of the flu, and it is a sickness that makes people sick. For instance, some people who have had it tell me this: they have been sicker than they've ever been before in their life. They say that, and so I didn't quite call bean on that, because last October when we came back from the cruise, I was back for just a couple of days, and suddenly I got sick. And I was sicker than I've ever been before in my life, and I meant it. Now, when I was a kid, I had strep throat. I had some bad ear infections. I had a few things like that, and I remember those. And I remember lying on the bed, having a high fever, knowing I have a high fever. My mom is taking care of me. I remember those times. I've in my later childhood, I had whooping cough. I had chicken pox. I had those kind of things at different times. I had various stomach bugs that have come through, and I think once maybe in the past 20 years I've caught something like a flu that was an actual flu, where I had the high fevers and the body aches, and I had food poisoning before too. But last October when I got sick, and I was sick with a strong fever, and I had the worst headache that I've ever had for about 3 days, I legitimately say that was that I was sicker than I've ever been in my life. Now, I can say that at least once, but if I start every time now since then that I feel a little bit bad, if I start saying, man, I was sick as a dog, I'm sicker than I've ever been, after a while you'll be like, Joseph's always sick. Or you'll start saying, Joseph's a wimp, he can't handle anything, and he just always says he's sicker than he's ever been. So I don't want to get to that point. I want to use my words carefully and to use my descriptors carefully, and I want to save the contrasts. I don't want to overdo and only live in one side of the contrast. So I have one other example. I'm a storyteller, and so in the film this year, and I didn't actually bring any film, any shots here I could show you, but in the movie We Three Kings, when Spencer Weaver, our DP, was working, we were talking, how do we want to film it? I told him I really want this feeling, when we're indoors, I want the feeling of warmth coming from pockets of light, so that there's like darkness in the peripheral areas, but where the people are, there's little pockets of light. So there's a lamp on the table, and there's a pocket of light, and then there's another, that's what I wanted. So he was working, and I thought he did a really good job of creating these pockets of warmth. But in order to do that, he had to use contrast very carefully. He had to use light and shadow, light and dark, and so together it made something that I thought was really beautiful. You can watch We Three Kings and tell me if you think the lighting is awesome, because I think that between Spencer Weaver and Jonathan Terpstra, they did an awesome job of lighting, and they made it beautiful. So I'm grateful for that. But I was thinking about it, in the early days of film, lighting became an art, and it was awesome. You had to use lighting because it was black and white. That was the only two colors you had, so you had to create these little shades in between, and you had to use a lot of lighting. Well, then later on we had color, and so that was awesome. So people began working on making things colorful and warm in that way. Well, then time went on, and we started, for television, they started using tape instead of film, and so this was a little different. And so now if you go back, there are some of those television shows, you go back, and there is no nuanced lighting at all. There's just, they literally sent up a barrage of lighting and said, we need as much light as possible. And they threw all the light at it they could, and it was just bright, and you might even say washed out. But in the 80s, there were quite a few television shows that were just very bright like this, and into the 90s. And so it wasn't until we switched to more other digital cameras that television shows could actually go back to some of the nuanced lighting and handle it better. And so again, there might be some exceptions. There might be some television show that kept the nuanced lighting in place. I'm just making big generalizations here while I'm drinking my coffee, and so yeah, you can tell me. But the point is, a regular scene in a movie, we don't throw as much light at it as we can. We actually have nuanced lighting. We want there to be complete darkness on one side, the dark, the blacks, and we want there to be white and light glowing somewhere else. We don't want it to be completely white or completely dark. We want there to be something even if you look at my face right now, you'll see that I have on half of my face has more lighting than the other side. And we're used to that kind of lighting. I have this painting here behind me. This is a painting that was given to us. It's an Ethel D. Thurman painting. She was an art teacher down in Victoria, Texas for years. She was born back in 1905. And she was a friend of one of our ancestors, one of Stacy's ancestors, several generations back. She was a friend. So we had several of her paintings in our family. And so over Thanksgiving, Stacy's mom gave us this one, and I love it. And I was just looking at this painting, and you're looking at it over here. It has a little bit more detail than what you're actually seeing. But the reality is, let me see if I can actually do this. Let me see if I can move in on the painting. This is a little wild. Okay. So, when Ethel painted this, she used some very dark tones back here. Actually, this is not paint, by the way. This is pastel. I should clarify. She painted some things, but this was a pastel piece. And so she has here on the lilacs, she has quite a bit of very light stuff. And then she has the dark colors that are in here in the back and stuff. And we see all of this. We see quite a bit of this contrast happening where there's very lights, and then there's some darker spots. And we expect this. Every time that we see a picture and a painting of any kind, we actually expect this. We expect to see lights, and we expect to see darkness. And so that is what we're expecting to see. Now, when someone uses all black, and then they put in a few white lines, we look at it closely. Sometimes we are like, what are they trying to say? Sometimes you'll see a painting or a picture that is so completely dark or so completely blown out with light that you're looking at it going, I can't even make sense of it. And so the point that I'm wanting to make here, let's see if I can get back to where I am. There I am. And a little bit of focus would be nice. There we go. So in art, we use white and black, and we use dark and light to create contrast so that the viewer can look at the picture and say, I see what you're trying to tell me. I see what you're making there. In words, when we tell stories, we use differing words. We start with a very soothing story for our youngsters when we're putting them to bed. And then as they get a little older, we can give them a little more rousing story, and it's okay. But we don't want to give a baby the exciting story of how the wolf ate the cow. It's certain things we don't want to give our babies right before they go to sleep, because they're not ready for that. So we give them calm, not very much contrast, kind of boring stories. For my little 2-year-old, he's quite happy just saying, look, a bunny, look, a moose, look, a chicken, ha ha ha, and he'll laugh about it, and it's fun. But when, as they get a little older, they want a little bit more. They want a little more smash bang. They want a little more adventure. They want a little more of the story. They want the contrast. And in life, we need that. And so what I wanted to share today was just, if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, let's say I say, I'm going to make a beautiful picture. And so I grab a tablet, and then I'm like, what are you going to use to draw this with? Well, I'll use this. And all I have is this really large marker. And I say, okay, here we go. I'm going to draw a picture. Well, the problem with this is I can draw a picture, and you can actually see what the picture is. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and make a mixture here, and I say, here is you say, that is a mountain. Okay, and so if I give a little more of this detail like this and put in a few more pieces here, I can actually make some more mountain. But what I'm really wanting to do that's hurting me right now is I'm wanting so bad to get a different size marker, because I don't like using all the same one. And so even here, you can notice my trees are not the same width as that. So I'm having this issue where I want to have something more than just one big black marker. I'm able to communicate. I'm able to make something, and that's great. But I'm really, really, really wishing I had more colors that has more and it's funny because even this marker, as I'm working with it, is making some contrast. So I can use this and I can draw something that's quite contrasty. And it's not all bad. It's actually kind of fun just to use high contrast. But when you want to make beautiful, nuanced art, you want more than just black and white, more than just a big, you want small lines, you want details. So can be striking and awesome, and I love it, but it has its place. I can't give you a painting of lilacs with just this tool and that. I actually have to have more nuance. And so here's what's happening that I'm concerned about in our society today. The media has discovered that for most of us, when they draw high contrast, we go, what? What's happening? Is it that bad? I didn't know. And we're listening on that level. And so if they just start telling us a medium contrast story, and they start telling us something that just happened, where it's warm golden sunshine, not really dark, not really bright, but it's just, here we are. Our appetite is not there for that. And so we're like, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling. What? What is this? And we're horrified by something. And so they realize so it's partly the media's fault, it's partly the consumer's fault, but if we all know about it, we can take care of this. They know that if we're horrified, we'll watch and we'll listen. And I don't want us to just get stuck on being horrified. I don't want us to get stuck on just the big, bad, black strokes. So when I mentioned earlier about the pandemic, we have a problem right now because in the spring we used the word pandemic, and in the summer we used the word pandemic, and now we're using the word pandemic again. And if you look online and you see how many cases have been happening of corona in each state and each country around the world, you'll notice there have been quite a bit of difference in how bad the hotspots have been in different places at different times. But we've been using kind of the same word. And so like a lot of governors are trying to use code reds and code yellows and code oranges and stuff to try to make it. But all it's doing to us, and a lot of time we're just hearing bad, it's really bad, it's worse, it's bad. And so we're losing our ability to contrast. And so at some point, someone will have called wolf one too many times, and we didn't actually see dead bodies in the street, so we don't believe that it's really bad, so we're not going to do anything about it. And then, who knows, maybe then we'll actually have some disease that kills that many people that we see dead bodies in the street, God forbid. But then what is the word that we have left after that? Do we have a word? Will we have to say it's a global pandemic and I'm not even lying? Will we have to say it's a global pandemic and there are actually people dying on the streets? What are we going to have to say if an actual disease with a really high death rate shows up? Do we have words left for that? That's what I'm asking. And I'm asking it about all the other things. Do you have enough words left? Or are you going to run out of words? Hey, Rodney. I see you're up in Greeley. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Appreciate it. So that's my thought for today, is save the contrast. Contrast is awesome, but nuance is necessary. And to create a story that has only contrast, that's a problem. We need to have some nuance, some shades of lilac colors in, to finish off the lilacs going as they fade into the darkness on that side. As the vase is rounded, we need all the colors. We need all the words. We need nuance. We need that. So I don't want to, when someone dies, that is a very sad thing. And, I was just thinking about the kind of things that we talk about, and people take our words because of the context that they've heard them and turn it around and make it mean something else. So I don't want to make light of people who are sick and dying of anything, but I want us to be able to converse in a meaningful way about everything. So save your contrasts. I don't want to bean you, okay? And I don't want you to bean me and say, you're using the same word over and over in different ways and it doesn't mean anything anymore. Stop using that word. Okay. I'll try not to use that word anymore because I don't want to get beaned. I want to have all my points at the end of the week. And, being me, I'd like to have a few of your points as well and point out to you where you can use a better vocabulary word. So grow your vocabulary. Take the time to say what you really mean, and don't just use a swear word or a cuss word to fill in. Don't use filler language. Don't use unnecessary language. Use real language and say what you actually mean. That's my coffee talk for today. Hopefully you'll enjoy that and apply it. I will see you guys next coffee talk. Blessings.